Oregon apparently got a little sneaky for their latest commit, and they're not done going after guys from the Golden Bears.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Some receiving core discussion in a post-Evan Stewart world and thoughts 6 months later after that fateful day. That's all on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So, Oregon has their latest addition to the class of 2026. It is Koloi Keli, three-star offensive lineman who had been committed to Cal, and he's now committed to Oregon. And the Ducks, according to Matt Prame at 24/7 Sports, got sneaky here. Quote, Keli was able to officially visit Oregon a few weeks ago for a visit that wasn't made public as the Ducks wanted to try and flip him to their side without Cal having a chance to get him back on campus before a dead period that is now in effect until the end of August. End quote. That's sneaky. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. You are either the dog or, as Norm famously said, you're wearing milk-bone underwear. There's no in-between. So Oregon has chosen the former here. And I just got a kick out of that particular tactic there, which certainly isn't brand new necessarily. I can't remember ever reading it about an Oregon commit, but that's not the first time it's happened in recruiting in the history of college football. So, 6'3", 290 pounds, offensive lineman. Koloi Keli is one of the top 10 players in the state of Hawaii. Oregon has, of course, had a little bit of success recruiting players that have had a background in that particular state. This is not somebody who is viewed as a super highly rated recruit. Now, that hasn't stopped Oregon's recruiting ranking from jumping in the eyes of 24/7, which shows you how close Oregon really is to landing a top 10 class. They went from 31 up to 22 nationally. 31st to 22nd is how I should phrase that. Nationally in the 24/7 composite rankings, bringing in a three-star offensive lineman who is just inside the top 100 at his position. Top 10 player in the state of Hawaii that doesn't have a huge plethora of high-end recruits. And he is just inside the top 1,200 players nationally overall, according to 24/7 Sports composite ranking. So, had been committed to Cal, commits to Oregon, and this is, of course, a solid pickup for Alik Terry, Oregon's offensive line coach, who has done a good job recruiting this position in the last couple of years. The Ducks are now up to 11 commitments in the class of 2026, and Keli is the fifth offensive player. This started as a much more defensively driven class. I don't think there's ever anything really to that. I definitely feel like the first couple cycles were more defensively focused, particularly on the defensive line. But the last two players to commit to the Ducks are an offensive lineman and a quarterback, of course, in Bryson Beaver, Jet Washington, the safety before that. So this rounds out Oregon's June with 4 commitments: Beaver, Keli, Washington, and Messiah Hampton, the wide receiver, who he indicated on Twitter might be getting a 5th star from some services. Dude's a stud. It wouldn't come as a total surprise to me necessarily, but it wasn't what I was expecting after watching this film. But guy's a stud. Like, I compared him and Brian Smith like the comparison of Messiah Hampton being like Emeka Egbuka. So Egbuka was a 5-star recruit. Guy's a monster. So this is a nice solid pickup for the Ducks. Certainly he doesn't look on paper. I'll try to track down Brian Smith, get his thoughts on his film and whatnot. Doesn't look on paper, when you just glance in the recruiting rankings, which are just that, like someone who's going to come in and start right away for the Ducks. But Dan Lanning has spoken several times in the past about how the trenches on both sides, offensive and defensive line, it's hard to play in your first year. And Oregon has certainly had their fair share of recruits that have waited their turn or, not played right away or only played a little bit and then gradually progressed more and more as their careers have gone on. I think of guys like Dave Iuli, who was a class of 2022 recruit and has been a rotational offensive lineman for the Ducks the last couple of years, has played more than he did in his first couple seasons, and I think he'll have a similar role this year. I think that Keli, as an interior offensive lineman, is someone who could play center. I wonder if this isn't sort of a almost kind of like backfill recruitment for someone that can play the center position, with OL Koloi going away from the Ducks and back to BYU from their 2025 class. Koloi is someone who's going to take an LDS mission, but by the time he got to Oregon's campus, I spoke of him at the time as someone who I could see being Oregon's starting center one day. Well, Keli will have the opportunity to do that. I don't think there's an obvious succession plan past 2026 if Poncho returns at that center position. So his ability to play in that spot can certainly be useful, not just for the Ducks roster, but for his own path to playing time. Like, you differentiate yourself if you're able to play that center spot. But anytime I see a lower rated offensive lineman, his composite score is 86.19. I think of Marcus Harper, who was, I think, in this same sort of range when he was recruited to Oregon, and he didn't start right away, but he was someone who, similar size to Keli, by the way. He was 6'4", 290, coming out in the class of 2020. Of course, committed to the Cristobal staff, stayed on with Dan Lanning and company. He was outside the top 700 players nationally and wound up being a 3-year starter for the Ducks and a darn good player. So there's always potential for these sorts of guys, but certainly on paper, it doesn't look like Keli's someone who, not that I don't like that Oregon has him, of course I do, and 6'3", 290, pretty prototypical size for someone on the interior of the offensive line. He's just not someone who I expect to come in and play as a true freshman or start as a true sophomore even. He probably redshirts a year and takes a little bit of time to get his body fully into shape, beat out other guys on the depth chart to be a starter for Oregon's offensive line. But certainly, is he capable of doing that one day? Yeah, he is. And so the other piece of news that came on the front with the California Golden Bears, our old Pac-12 foe, RIP, and welcome Texas State into the New World Pac-12. If you haven't seen that, check it out over on today's episode of Locked On College Football. But Tommy Tofi, interior offensive lineman who committed to Cal over Oregon and other places a while back, has decommitted from Cal, has reopened his recruitment. Now, does it strike you as a coincidence that Oregon lined up the stars to flip Koloi Keli from the Bears so that he couldn't take a visit during the dead period for the next couple months, and then an offensive lineman who Oregon was heavily pursuing and committed to Cal on the same day decommits from the Bears? Does that strike you as a coincidence? Because, Joseph Gordon-Levitt taught us in Levitt, I can pronounce things, taught us in The Dark Knight Rises, as detective, you're not allowed to believe in coincidences. Well, call me Detective Spencer for the day. I don't think that's a coincidence. So we'll see if the Ducks end up landing Tofi, who's one of the top offensive line prospects on the interior in the class of 2026. But some nice momentum here for the Ducks. And I think overall, June was okay. Wasn't bad. Wasn't exactly what maybe some of us were hoping for. But this is a pretty nice way to close it out, and certainly makes you feel like going into July, Oregon could start to ratchet up and get back inside the top 10. Speaking of which, Dylan sent this one in. Didn't say he wanted it for Spencer's scale of agreement, but I'm applying it anyway because I'm the executive producer of the show, so that's how this works. Dylan says, heard it here first. We will have a top 8 class. Oof. Top 8 class? I mean, a 3-star offensive lineman moves you up 9 spots. It can be a volatile world. Part of that, I think, is Cal dropped down a bit because Cal's been recruiting pretty well in the class of 2026. A top 8 class. Give me a 4. Give me a 4 on top 8. This certainly enhances my confidence level that they'll get back inside the top 10. Lowers the concern meter with where Oregon's recruiting is at and whether or not they'll get inside that top 10 rate. But top 8, gonna need some things to go right. Feasible. I think top 5 is out of the picture, but in that 6 to 10 range is where I think Oregon winds up. So top 8. Well, I guess mathematically I should give that a 5 and say I'm down the middle on it. So gut instinct, logical answer, split it down the middle, King Solomon style, and that's 4.5. So let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Hit me up on Twitter, all that good stuff. That receiver room. I got really excited thinking about it the other day. First, this episode brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing. Whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel's the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why would you not want to make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. And if you want to bet something related to Oregon, you're allowed to do that because their win total is 10.5. Their conference title odds are top 3. Their national title odds are top 5 in the country. I mean, you got a lot of stuff that you can examine. Heisman odds, if you think Dante Moore's popping off. Individual games, all of Oregon's games this season can be wagered upon over at FanDuel to make the action even better. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Check them out at FanDuel.com. All right, second segment sip out of the way, and we are ready to roll. I got really excited, kind of randomly, but my brain never stops thinking about these things, when I pondered the Oregon wide receiver room. Because I got a question. Well, I asked for questions from my Locked On Ducks insider crowd, and got a bunch of great responses and thoughts, as always. But one thought that was on one of your guys' minds out there: who steps up without Evan Stewart? And this insider thought it would be Justice Lowe and or Gary Bryant Jr. Now, those are the names that my mind went to when thinking about who replaces Stewart's production. He had 48 catches last year, over 600 yards, and 5 touchdowns. This year, I expected all of those numbers to go up. I didn't get to the point where I was making a statistical prediction for him this year. I probably would have been in the 55 to 60 catches, at least 800 to 900 yards, potentially pushing for 1,000 yards season, depending on how quickly he builds that chemistry with Dante Moore and how many deep shots they're able to connect on, because Evan Stewart was Oregon's most consistent deep threat last year at the receiver position. Trayshawn Holden was very good as well. And probably in the 8-ish touchdowns range. Six to 8, when you have as many other weapons in the red zone as Oregon does, like Kenyon Sadiq, could be hard for receivers to catch touchdowns, but nevertheless, it was going to happen in some quantity, so why don't we just call it 7? So my prediction would have been 55 catches, 875 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Say 7. So where do those catches go? The reason my mind, back when I first discussed this, went to Gary Bryant Jr. and Justice Lowe is they're the most experienced guys in the room. Lowe is going into his 4th year of college football. He stepped up big time when Tez Johnson went out last year and did a really good job in a couple of different spots. And he stepped up when Trayshawn Holden was ejected from the Ohio State game. Dude has proven plenty capable, and receivers in that room have buzzed about him for quite a long time. Gary Bryant Jr. is going into his 6th year of college football and is also someone who we can easily forget makes a lot of explosive plays and also has a lot of positional versatility, not just with where you can line him up, but the types of routes that he can run. You can get him the ball behind the line of scrimmage. He can push the ball down the field a little bit. He hasn't been a consistent deep threat, I guess. He's been more of an intermediate guy and gadget player, but I think he's got plenty of ability there. And he was a borderline 5-star recruit coming out of high school. So those are the guys where my mind jumped to. I could see other options. I could see Kyler Casper, who I talked about on yesterday's show, having a bigger role. I could see Jerion Dickey getting a bigger role as a result. But then I got excited. I got excited thinking about the possibility, I'm not predicting, the possibility of this Evan Stewart injury, which definitely stinks, opening the door for Decorian Moore to establish himself as the most star-studded Oregon wide receiver ever. And I don't just mean with his recruiting ranking, I mean on the field. Like the receiver that's probably most well-known in the last 10 years at wide receiver for Oregon is Tez Johnson. Plenty of people know Troy Franklin. Tez Johnson, who it'll never stop being funny to me. Did you know that Tez Johnson and Bo Nix are brothers? I don't know. I didn't know if you'd heard. And if you had not heard, everyone needs to know that the bird is the word. So Tez Johnson would probably be pretty high on that list. DeCorian Moore can be better than Tez Johnson, who, had he not been injured, would have put up back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons. DeCorian Moore can be better. He's a little bit bigger, and I think can stretch the field vertically more than Tez did, which he certainly did. I think DeCorian can be more consistent with it because he has a little bit more size to him. I think he can have a little bit more physicality in his game, and he's somebody who just has outstanding ball skills, even though he's not the tallest guy in the world at about 5'11". I got really excited thinking about this possibility because how exhilarating would it be as an Oregon fan to tune in to Oregon games over the next 2 years and it's Dante Moore to DeCorian Moore over and over again for back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. That's never happened before. We haven't had a connection like that. Because DeCorian Moore is already a big name, if he goes out and has a huge freshman season, can you imagine the national hype train and what my personal hype train will be if he goes out and sets the Oregon freshman receiving record? I'm not placing that expectation on him, but man, the possibility is sure there. More to more. I think we could see a lot of that. So I got excited about that. Thought I would share. And this also came from a Locked On Ducks insider. This could double as a hot take. But what's your feelings on Luke Moga developing into a Taysom Hill role? A lot of Luke Moga buzz recently. You know what? I'm here for that too. Moga's athleticism doesn't have to just be utilized as a starting quarterback. I have said several times this offseason, wildcat role in the red zone, sign me up. It is advantageous, particularly in the red zone where numbers are tough, to be able to run your quarterback. You're not going to have design runs for Dante Moore. Last year, Dylan Gabriel ran some speed options, a couple of quarterback sweeps. You're not doing that. But you could do that with Luke Moga. First and goal at the 6-yard line. Put him back there. Give defenses something else to think about. And even when you know the run's coming, it doesn't mean it's easy to stop. Because when your quarterback's fast, guys have to be sound with their assignments, and you can run all sorts of motions and counters and get them confused. And then if it's Luke Moga one-on-one against somebody run into the perimeter, I like his chances there. Dude is a freakishly good athlete. So the Taysom Hill role, though, I don't think it would go that far. Because Taysom Hill for the Saints, he's a wildcat quarterback. He lines up at fullback. He lines up at tight end. He does stuff on special teams. Moga's not doing that because Oregon could actually want him to play quarterback one day. And that's just not how you'd utilize a quarterback when you have other options to fill those spots. The Saints have done a great job using Taysom Hill in the role that he has, but there's no need for Oregon to take Luke Moga and turn him into somewhat of a tight end and get creative in that sense, because they have plenty of tight ends. They have one of the best in all of college football. They've got some depth in that room. It's not incredibly proven, but it's a solid group of guys. I think you would only turn Luke Moga into, a tight end / fullback. Zach Grace last year was a surprisingly important player in the offense. Why? He was the fullback. When Oregon went jumbo, Zach Grace was there leading the way, despite what Todd Blackledge mistakenly identified him as Tatum Tuioti in the Big Ten championship game. It was Zach Grace. You don't need to put Moga in there. I think that would be unnecessary without adding any value, whereas there is value he provides that nobody else can as a running quarterback. So I don't think a full-on Taysom Hill role, but I hope there's at least a package. Let me tell you something. I get excited when I talk myself into certain positions or, takes in the off season and they materialize in the actual season on the field. If the first time Oregon gets in the red zone, Luke Moga comes in with Jay Harris next to him and they just run quarterback power with Jay Harris or Jayden Lamar, who's a great blocker at running back, leading the way, I will be as happy in that moment as I might be when Oregon wins its first national championship. Those might be on similar footing. Not actually, but you get what I'm going for here. I would be over the moon. So, if you guys are able to come up with more Luke Moga questions, hey, keep them coming. I like Luke Moga. He is an interesting guy to talk about. And it's 6 months to the day since Oregon's season ended. I keep getting requests, and so I have acquiesced. Something to know about that Rose Bowl against Ohio State. So I finally did it. I'd been saying I'd do it for a while, and I just didn't have the stomach to do it, but half a year has passed since that miserable day in Pasadena, and I went back and I watched the whole game. And a couple of things stood out. The takes I had in the aftermath of that game, Oregon got out coached. Ohio State was just really good. Definitely felt that was the case. Two things that I don't think I talked about as much at the time that are going to apply to this 2025 season for the Ducks. One of the underrated stats that's going in the wrong direction is Oregon has run for fewer yards per game in each successive year Dan Lanning and company have been in charge. And some of that is definitely due to Will Stein's RPO-based offense where, yeah, you'll hand the ball off, but you will also not hand the ball off plenty of times. Dillingham ran some of it, not nearly as much as Will Stein. When you give quarterbacks those options, as they should, they're not going to give it to the running back every time. It does result from time to time, and it can be frustrating to watch in moments where it's an RPO and the quarterback pulls the ball out because he thinks he should, and you look at the play and you're like, oh, that was going to be a 15-yard run if you just handed the ball off right there. So, you know, every offensive system, game plan approach has got its pluses and minuses, but Oregon's offensive line last year, of course, had that horrific start to the season, and Malik Terry had the shirt made after the Idaho game, 2.9 yards per carry against Idaho. Oregon's offensive line was a finalist for the Joe Moore Award. They were in the top 12. I don't remember if they got to the top 6 or 8, but they deserved to be in that spot, mostly because of the pass protection. The run blocking last year for Oregon wasn't great. Remember, this is a rushing attack last year, and Jordan James is not a LaMichael James type home run hitter, but he can break a big run. He's done it before, many a times. And he didn't have a carry of over, I think it was 15 yards until the Michigan State game. So whether it was scheme-based or offensive line-based or a little bit of both, which is my suspicion, Oregon has not created enough of a push consistently in the run game to create explosives and to really control the game. So that was the first thing I noticed, was Oregon really struggled to create any sort of running lane. Now, Ohio State's defense was incredibly elite. Their safeties and linebackers played outrageously well. Their gap discipline, tackling in space, their read and reacting to what Oregon was doing was all really, really good. And that led into what I noticed second most when I watched it recently was Oregon was really bad on first down. And every coach will talk to you about the importance of first down. But the thing that Oregon struggled with in this game, well, there were a lot of things Oregon struggled with in that particular football game. And I bring this up today to just for big games like Penn State this year, these are the sorts of things that can make a huge difference. So Oregon actually wound up being 8 of 19 on third down. The fact that they got to 19 third downs, Ohio State got to 11. Now, third down's the money down, right? And Oregon was 2 of 3 on fourth down in the game. But Oregon got to 8 of 19 on fourth down because they weren't good on first down. And part of the reason they weren't good on first down, they could not consistently run the ball. So when I talk about this Oregon offensive line in 2025, one thing that I'm looking for, particularly early in the season, is how do they create running lanes? Mekhi Hughes is somebody who is kind of a hybrid between Jordan James and Bucky Irving, the last two running backs Oregon has had. He's got all the tools to have a 1,000-yard season. And, Oregon doesn't have to be significantly better for their running back to get there. But I would love to see this Oregon offense not, regress back to the Mario Cristobal era where it's run the ball on first, run the ball on second, and then ask Justin Herbert to bail you out on third down. No, I'm not a fan of that particular approach. We saw that too many times. But I would like to see this Oregon offensive line get a more consistent push in the run game and create more opportunities for explosive plays on the ground, because that was something that was lacking. And against Ohio State, they were held to, let's see, they ran for 28, they ran for minus 23 yards. That factors in sack yardage. So the actual rushing stats, when you take all that out, were still really, really bad. Noah Whittington, Jaden Lamar, and Jordan James, 15 carries for 21 yards and a touchdown. Yeah, that's not getting it done. And that Oregon offensive line, you could look at a number of games where, yeah, they ran the ball okay, ran it fine. But what was Oregon's dominant running game last year? What was the game where you felt like the ground attack carried the offense? Certainly there were days where they were balanced. The first Ohio State game comes to mind. But those are the two things, as Oregon continues on this quest to try and win its first national championship, that, in the biggest game of the year, they didn't have those two things. And so going into matchups like Penn State, I'm going to be looking for that to see if they, have improved from where they were at a season ago. Can they be better on first down so that they don't get into 19 third down situations on the game compared to Ohio State's 11? And can they run the ball just more consistently without having to rely on the RPO game? So that's the last thing here on the 6-month anniversary of what was a very traumatic day for all of us, I'm sure. I just kept getting requests, and I thought, you know what? Now is an appropriate time. You got to be able to admit there's a problem, talk about it, figure out how you adjust and move forward. So those be the thoughts, and that is how we wrap today's show. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time, and until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.